Is the West suffering from Ukrainian fatigue? We'll come to your calls on this in a moment. I think it's a very important conversation to have because it's sort of gone off the radar a little bit, and there are people still fighting for their lives and dying in numbers. So I do think it's a very important conversation to bring back to the fore. Now, joining me to discuss this is Cormac Smith, a strategic communications advisor to the yet then Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister Pavlo Klimkin. Evening, Cormac. The EU has agreed to this Euro 50 billion support package, not before time. Why did it take so long, and what have they actually achieved?
Look, you're quite right. It's not before time. It was delayed before Christmas by Viktor Orban of Hungary, who, not to put too fine a cap on it, is a Putin proxy in the UN, or in the EU, I'm sorry, and has blocked this. I mean, this is absolutely vital for Ukraine in their fight against Russia. So, not before time at all.
Now, we know that this was a big hold-up, and we know that the European leaders are now saying that they're standing foursquare behind Ukraine in its fight with Russia. But we still have a situation where the US has still not got its own support package of $60-odd billion through Congress yet. So there is a clock ticking, and Zelensky knows it. There are elections coming up, and we might not have Biden in the White House later this year.
No, what's happening in the States is very, very concerning. Again, and I'll be very, very blunt, there are a number of effectively Putin proxies in the GOP, the Republican Party, among them House Speaker Michael Johnson, who seem to be doing Putin's job for him. And of course, we are now facing the very, very real prospect that we could have a second Trump presidency, and all of the smart money is saying that Trump would most likely not just withdraw support from Ukraine, but take the United States out of NATO, leaving us in Europe to stand on our own 2 feet against a revanchist Russia.
Well, Europe may indeed end up standing on its own 2 feet, and this is an indication of intent from the EU that it is willing to step up and provide support to Ukraine. The UK itself gave $2.5 billion in additional aid to Ukraine only the other day. When Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, said only a few weeks ago that no price is too high for the West to support Ukraine, was he right?
He was absolutely right. And we have got to remember that in 2024, genocide is being carried out in a European who had been invaded by Russia. Actually, Ukraine was invaded for the first time in 2014, but the further invasion that happened on the 24th of February 2022, almost 2 years ago now, has seen absolute devastation. And, when I say genocide, and I don't use that word lightly, this is genocide that passes all 5 tests of the United Nations Convention. Russia is a country that murders, tortures, rapes, enslaves, and destroys everything before it. I will give the example of the once beautiful Ukrainian city of Mariupol. Between 1941 and 1943, the Nazis murdered 20,000 citizens of Mariupol in 2 years. It is estimated by, among others, the office of the mayor of Mariupol, that the Russians have murdered over 100,000 in Mariupol in just 3 months, and they have wiped a city of about 500,000, the size of Edinburgh, off the face of the map. And there are many other cities in the occupied zones that have faced the same consequences from the Russian invasion. And let's be very, very clear. Russia will not stop at Ukraine. And, after Ukraine, certainly the Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania are certainly in the sights. And don't take my word for it. Speak to people from those states or speak to people from Poland, and they will tell you very, very clearly what their real fear of a Russian invasion is. And of course, if Trump was to get back in the White House, and if Trump was, as we believe he would, to take the United States out of NATO, and if Europe does not start standing up very, very soon, that would be a red rag to a revanchist Putin.
Do you actually think that there is any evidence for the fact that Putin would actually attack a NATO state?
I think Putin would attack a NATO state if he thought he could get away with it. And, currently we have got to remember, the reason that we have to support Ukraine is fighting bravely against a country 3.5 times its size, against a country that is currently on a war footing, which we in the West still are not, currently that's on a war footing with 40% of its gross domestic products being put into its war effort. If Europe, the combined EU and Britain, who of course have been from the very start, we have been the one of Ukraine's greatest supporters, and you mentioned the 2.5 billion, which was 200 million more than we have given for the last 2 years. But the combined economic might of Britain, the other European countries who are not in the EU, and the EU is about 15 times the size of Russia, but we're not yet on a war footing. We need to put our industries, our armaments industries, on a war footing, because, Ali, this is a wolf which will come to our door. And if Putin thinks Europe is weak, he will attack.
But you see, Cormac, this is the exact issue, and you've alighted on it, and I'm glad you have, because this is the problem. Western leaders like to speak out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. On the one hand, they talk tough on supporting Ukraine, and indeed chivying up Zelensky to actually believe that he can retake Crimea, which they did nothing about in 2014 when it was taken by Russia. But yet they're not putting their states on a war footing. In fact, they are not providing the support that Ukraine needs when it needs it. Now, Valery Zhizhulny, the chief of Ukrainian forces, wrote a piece in The Economist back in November saying that, look, we're grateful for what the West is doing for us. We're not complaining, but you always give us the weapons we need too late to actually make any difference on the battlefield. We need a game changer here, either F-16s or something. They always come after the event. Do you think there's merit in that, Cormac? Are we actually being serious in the West about supporting Ukraine?
I think there's merit in that completely. And look, I always go back to what Oleksiy Reznikov, who was the Ukraine's Minister of Defense at the time of the invasion and up to about 6 months ago when that position changed. And Oleksiy Reznikov went on CNN around the 21st of December 2021, and he said, "We don't expect your boots on the ground. Just give us the weapons we need and we will do our own fighting." Now, there is nobody has done more to arm Ukraine than Britain. The lightweight anti-tank weapons, the NLAWs that we gave them at the start of the war, were probably, along with the American javelins, responsible for the winning of the Battle of Kyiv. But there were 3 weapon systems which Ukraine has been crying out for almost 2 years. They were modern battle tanks. They were long-range artillery, which would allow Ukraine to hit elements of the Russian logistics chain far behind the front line, and also modern battle tanks. Now, almost a year ago, Britain helped break the logjam with the modern battle tanks by giving Ukraine initially 14 Challengers. This eventually led to the Americans giving the Abrams and the Germans giving the Leopards. But we still, Ukraine needs between 300 and 500 modern battle tanks. They've not got 100 in total yet. We still have not given them the F-16s, and we're still not giving them the long-range artillery, despite Britain last summer, giving them storm shadow, but other countries like Germany are still not standing up with the Taurus and the Americans with the really long range 300 kilometer stuff. So
now, Cormac, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this finally. Despite everything that you've just said, there is a stalemate on the battlefield at the moment. The Russians have bedded in. Putin has got nowhere to go. He's badly miscalculated and he's thrown everything in. And he's perfectly happy to throw hundreds of thousands of soldiers and compensate their families accordingly for this war. Is there a danger that if there is no game changer on the part of the West in terms of getting their economies on a war footing properly, that there actually will be fatigue that will set in and Ukraine will lose this war?
There is a massive danger, and we are all by a term, Ukraine fatigue, which I first came across in 2016, before I went out to Ukraine to work for the Ukrainian government as a British diplomat for 2 years. There is Ukraine fatigue setting in. The problem is the Ukrainians know that they cannot stop fighting. A very good friend of mine, a senior Ukrainian diplomat, said at the start of this war, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops Ukraine. And yes, there is a huge risk of Ukraine running out of steam. At the moment, the Russians are firing 3 times as many artillery shells as the Ukrainians are, and the Ukrainians are having to switch across the front line from attack to defense. They are in an absolutely dire situation, and we need to stand up and we need to step up an awful lot quicker.
Thank you very much, Cormac. That was Cormac Smith, Strategic Communications Advisor to the then Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister Pavlo Klimkin. Sorry.